Setting up the ocean. We're at the beach. You've got a cooler, a towel, maybe a podcast playing in your ears, and the ocean is just there. Background noise. Something to glance at between scrolling your phone and reapplying sunscreen. You know exactly what it is. You know it's salt water. You know there are waves because of the moon. You know what's probably in there. Sharks, fish, maybe a dolphin if you're lucky. You've seen 1,000 photos of it, 1,000 movies with it in the background. You learned about it in 3rd grade. The ocean for you is completely explained. It is, in the most literal sense, boring. Now strip all of that away, every bit of it. Imagine you're not you. You're an early human, tens of thousands of years ago, walking with your group through unfamiliar terrain. You've spent your entire life inland. Forests, grasslands, rivers you can see across, lakes you can walk around in an afternoon. Every body of water you've ever encountered has had an edge you could see, a far shore, a known size. Water to you is a finite thing, a resource, something you control, something you cross, something you drink from. And then the trees break, and there it is. Not a lake, not a river, something that has no far shore, something that moves on its own, constantly, with no wind required, sound the entire time like the world itself is breathing. Something that goes all the way to where the sky touches it, and then, presumably, just keeps going past that. There is no frame of reference for this. None. Your brain, which has spent every single day of your life cataloging the world into things I understand and things I need to watch out for, has absolutely nowhere to file this. It does not match anything. It does not behave like anything you know. This is the moment we almost never think about. We talk about humans discovering fire, discovering tools, discovering agriculture, like big triumphant turning points. But somewhere, at some point, completely unrecorded, unmythologized, there was a first human or a first small group of humans who rounded a bend or crested a dune and saw the ocean for the very first time in the history of our species. No name for it. No story prepared. No elder who'd seen it before to say, "Don't worry, that's normal." Just raw, unfiltered confrontation with something genuinely incomprehensible. So what actually happened in that moment? What does a human brain do when it runs face first into something that breaks every category it has ever built? Did they freeze? Did they run? Did they fall to their knees? Did they think it was alive? Did they think it was the edge of existence itself, the place where the world simply stopped? Because here's the thing that makes this so fascinating. We're not just guessing romantically here. There's actual science behind how a human nervous system responds to vastness, to formlessness, to a threat with no shape and no edges. There's psychology behind why open water specifically triggers something different than open land. And there's a long, strange thread of mythology across nearly every coastal culture on Earth that all seems to circle back to the exact same conclusion, independently, over and over again, about what the ocean actually was to them. Not water, not scenery, something else entirely, something terrifying. Let's go back to that first encounter and figure out exactly what was happening in that ancient mind. Поищу научные данные про врожденный страх воды, /высоты у людей и приматов для этого блока. Хорошая фактура, использую ее аккуратно. Без точных цифр процентов. Без чрезмерного цитирования. Let's go back to that moment. The trees break. The ground drops away into sand. And there it is. Before we get into what that human was thinking, we need to talk about something more basic. We need to talk about what their body was doing automatically, before a single conscious thought had time to form, because that's where the story actually starts. Humans did not evolve for water. Not open water, not deep water. Every adaptation we carry, our lungs, our skin, our reflexes, was built for solid ground. We can't breathe underwater. We sink faster than we float. We have no natural defense against drowning, no instinct for navigating depth like fish or seals do. From the moment our ancestors stood upright on the African savanna, the rules of survival were written entirely around land. Where's the food? Where's the shelter? Where's the predator? Every single one of those questions assumes solid ground under your feet, and a horizon you can actually read. And this is where it gets interesting, because the fear of depth, of falling into nothing, might not even be something we learn. It might be something we're born with. In the 1960s, psychologists Eleanor Gibson and Richard Walk built something called the visual cliff, a glass platform with a steep drop on one side, made to look real even though it was perfectly safe to cross. Babies just old enough to crawl were placed on it. Over and over, those infants stopped at the edge. They hesitated, they backed away, some cried, even though there was nothing there that could actually hurt them. Just the visual suggestion of a void was enough to trigger panic. In a creature that had barely existed for half a year. Researchers have argued for decades over exactly what this proves, whether it's pure instinct or something that snaps into place, the moment a baby starts moving through the world. But either way, the pattern holds across species after species, animal after animal tested on that same glass. Depth without a visible bottom reads as danger almost immediately, almost universally. Now scale that up. A baby on a glass platform sees a drop of a few feet. The first human to see the ocean saw a drop with no bottom at all, stretching in every direction, swallowing the horizon itself. There was no glass underneath this one, no safety net, just an instinctive, full-body recognition that the ground had run out, and something vast and bottomless had taken its place. Layer onto that the second problem, the one that's almost worse: motion. Land doesn't move. A forest stays where you left it. A mountain doesn't shift while you sleep, but the ocean is never still. It heaves, it rolls, it makes sound without wind, without any visible cause. To a brain built entirely around predicting threats by their movement, this is close to incomprehensible. Predators move because they're alive. Rivers move because they're going somewhere. Downhill, toward something. The ocean moves and goes nowhere. It just moves, forever, for no reason your ancestral brain can process. Modern psychologists have a name for this kind of reaction: agency detection. Our tendency to assume that anything moving without obvious cause must be alive, must have intention. Stand at the edge of something enormous, restless, and endless, and your oldest, most primitive circuitry doesn't conclude that's just water. It concludes something is breathing. This is the body's verdict, delivered in less than a second, long before language or reasoning gets involved. Pure animal alarm. The mind hadn't even started working yet. That part comes next. Once the body stops screaming, the mind has to start working. And this is where things get genuinely strange, because the human brain hates one thing more than almost anything else: a category it can't fill. Every object, every creature, every landscape an early human ever encountered got sorted instantly into something useful. Edible or not, dangerous or not, familiar or not. This sorting wasn't optional. It was the entire operating system. A brain that couldn't classify the world fast enough didn't survive long enough to pass on its genes. So when something appears that refuses every category, that doesn't behave like a lake, a forest, an animal, or a storm, the mind doesn't just feel fear. It feels something closer to vertigo. A kind of cognitive free fall, where the usual rules simply stop applying. And the ocean, more than almost anything else on Earth, refuses to be filled in. Stand at the edge of a forest and your eyes can still trace shapes, still imagine what's 20 feet past the tree line. Stand at the edge of a canyon and you can see the far wall, you can estimate the drop, but stand at the edge of the ocean and look out, and there's nothing for your eyes to land on. No far shore, no landmark, just water curving away into a flat line where it meets the sky, and beyond that line, nothing you can verify exists at all. Your brain, built to extrapolate the world beyond what it can directly see, runs out of information and has to fill the gap with something. And for most of human history, what it filled that gap with was the edge of existence itself. This wasn't a fringe idea. It was close to a universal one. Across wildly separate, unconnected cultures, the same basic conclusion kept showing up independently. The world has a boundary, and the ocean is it. Ancient Mesopotamian cosmology described the world as a disk surrounded by an endless cosmic sea. Early Greek thought held that the river Oceanus encircled the entire known world, the literal edge past which nothing existed. Norse mythology placed Midgard, the human world, ringed entirely by a sea so vast it housed a serpent large enough to circle the globe and bite its own tail. Different continents, different climates, different languages, completely different mythological systems arriving, again and again, at the identical shape of an idea. Land is the known world, and the ocean marks where the known world stops. That's not coincidence. That's what an unfillable horizon does to a species whose entire cognitive architecture is built around mapping, predicting, and bounding its environment. When the brain cannot determine where something ends, it tends to assume the answer is nowhere, or worse, that the ending is the end of everything. Psychologists call this kind of unease, the dread that comes specifically from scale and formlessness, rather than from any identifiable threat, something closer to existential anxiety than ordinary fear. You're not afraid of a creature. You're not afraid of an event. You're afraid of the sheer, indifferent size of the thing in front of you, and what your own smallness in comparison to it might mean. And there's a second layer to this, one that compounds the first. Every other dangerous landscape early humans faced still gave them information to work with. A predator left tracks. A storm had warning signs, darkening skies, dropping temperatures. the smell of rain. Even a cliff edge could be measured by eye. The ocean offered none of that. No footprints in water, no trail to read, no scent to follow, no way to predict what it might do next, or what might be moving beneath its surface, completely invisible, completely unknowable. For a species whose survival depended entirely on reading the environment correctly, the ocean was the first landscape that simply refused to be read at all. So the first humans to stand at that shoreline weren't just afraid of drowning. They were confronting the limits of their own ability to understand the world, and finding for the first time that those limits had an edge they could actually see. Once the mind admits it can't categorize something, it doesn't just sit there confused, it does what human minds have always done. With the unexplainable, it builds a story around it, and nowhere is that more obvious, more consistent, more strangely universal, than in how separate, unconnected cultures all over the planet responded to the ocean. By populating it with monsters, this is worth sitting with for a second. Because it's genuinely odd, civilizations that never made contact with each other, separated by oceans themselves, separated by thousands of years, kept arriving at the same basic conclusion, completely independently. Something enormous lives down there, something serpentine, something capable of swallowing ships whole. In Norse mythology, it was Jörmungandr, a serpent so massive it encircled the entire world underwater, gripping its own tail, said to surface only at the end of all things. In Hebrew scripture, it was Leviathan, described across multiple books as a chaotic, multi-headed sea beast, representing the raw, untamable force of creation itself. In Greek mythology, sailors told stories of Scylla, a monster with too many heads and too many teeth, lurking in narrow straits specifically to drag men off their ships. In Japan, the Ainu people spoke of Akarokamue, a colossal octopus-like creature said to glow red beneath the waves. In Scandinavian folklore centuries later, that same shape resurfaced again, as the Kraken, a beast large enough to be mistaken for an island, capable of pulling entire vessels under in a single motion. Different gods, different oceans, different millennia, and yet the same instinct kept producing the same shape, again and again. A massive, serpentine, hidden predator lurking just beneath visibility. That repetition is the real story here. More than any single myth, when the human mind can't see the bottom of something, it doesn't default to assuming the bottom is empty. It defaults to assuming the bottom is occupied, and usually by something that wants to kill you. This is a survival shortcut, not a flaw. A species that assumes danger in the unknown, and prepares accordingly, outlives a species that assumes safety, and gets it wrong even once. But here's the layer most people miss. These myths weren't just stories told for entertainment, around a fire. For coastal cultures especially, sea monster legends functioned as something closer to a warning system, a piece of practical infrastructure disguised as folklore. Parents told children about creatures lurking past the reef, not because they'd personally seen one, but because the stories kept people cautious, kept them close to shore, kept them from sailing out past the point where rescue was possible. Fear, encoded into narrative, became a survival tool. That could be passed down without anyone needing to explain currents, storms, or the simple fact that open water kills people who aren't prepared for it. And this is where the honest complication comes in, the part that doesn't fit neatly into pure terror. Not every culture that lived beside the ocean treated it purely as a monster's lair. Coastal communities also depended on it. They fished it, read its tides, learned its moods in granular, practical detail that inland cultures never developed. Fear and familiarity sat side by side in the same people, sometimes in the same sentence. You could believe something massive lived in the deep water past the horizon, and still walk into the shallows every morning to check your nets, because you'd learned exactly where the manageable ocean ended, and the unknowable one began. That line, the one between the water you understood, and the water you didn't, is really what these monsters represent. Not the whole ocean, just the part still unmapped by human experience, the part still empty enough for imagination to fill. Setting up the final turn, the one that actually explains how we got from there to here. Because here's the strange thing about fear like this. It doesn't usually stay still. Left alone long enough, raw terror either calcifies into permanent avoidance or it gets converted into something else entirely. Preparation, curiosity, method. And somewhere in the long stretch of human history between that first paralyzed reaction on the shoreline and the world we live in now, that's exactly what happened to our relationship with the ocean. The fear didn't go away. It got rerouted. Consider what it actually takes to build a boat. Not a raft for crossing a calm river, but a vessel meant to survive open water, water with no far shore, water that moves on its own and swallows ships whole in the mythology of every coastal culture on the planet. You don't build that out of casual curiosity. You build it because the fear was specific enough, detailed enough, taken seriously enough that people sat down and started solving it piece by piece. What keeps a hull from splitting under a swell? What kind of sail catches wind without capsizing? How do you store enough fresh water for a journey with no guaranteed endpoint? Every one of those questions only gets asked by people who took the danger completely seriously and decided to outthink it instead of simply staying on land forever. And some cultures took that further than anyone reasonably should have been able to. The Polynesian navigators are maybe the single greatest example in all of human history of fear converted directly into mastery. These were people who launched themselves into the largest ocean on Earth in wooden outrigger canoes, with no compass, no instruments, nothing modern navigation would consider remotely sufficient. And they didn't just survive it. They mapped thousands of miles of open Pacific using star paths memorized across generations. The direction and rhythm of ocean swells they could feel through the hull with their own bodies. The flight patterns of birds that signaled land was near. They turned the exact thing that should have killed them. The same featureless, monster-haunted horizon their ancestors once stood paralyzed in front of, into the most sophisticated wayfinding system in the ancient world. The fear never disappeared. It became expertise instead. The Vikings did something similar centuries later, sailing open Atlantic water in longships toward coastlines nobody back home had confirmed existed. The age of exploration that followed, whatever its complicated legacy, ran on the exact same underlying engine. Centuries of accumulated maritime knowledge, all of it built on top of an original primal terror that refused to just be ignored and instead got studied, mapped, and slowly, generation by generation, tamed. That's the actual arc here. Not fear replaced by comfort, but fear converted into capability. Every single thing that lets you stand at the edge of the water today and feel almost nothing, no vertigo, no dread, no sense that you're staring at the literal edge of the world, exists because thousands of generations before you did the opposite. They felt all of it, completely unfiltered. And instead of turning away forever, enough of them turned that terror into ships, navigation, charts, and eventually ease. So go back to the beach chair we started with, the cooler, the podcast, the completely unbothered glance at the horizon while you reapply sunscreen. None of that boredom is natural. It's earned. It's the end result of an unbroken chain of people who stood exactly where you're standing, looked at exactly what you're looking at, and felt something close to pure existential terror, and chose to face it anyway. You're not less afraid because the ocean got smaller or safer or more explainable on its own. You're less afraid because somewhere back along your ancestral line, someone decided the unknown was worth confronting instead of just enduring. That's not a small inheritance. That's arguably one of the most important ones we have.